Welcome to the SDA Housing Podcast, brought to you by NDIS Property Australia. Before starting this episode, we need to provide a general disclaimer. Information contained in this podcast is general in nature only. It does not take into account the objectives, financial situation, or needs of any particular person. You need to consider your financial situation and needs before making any decisions based on the information in this podcast. And you should consider seeking independent and professional advice for your personal circumstances. All right, let's begin.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the SDA Housing Podcast, a show that explains, highlights, guides, and brings awareness to all things SDA in this ever-changing NDIS world. My name is Debbie from NDIS Property Australia, and with me today is Greg Barry from SDA Services. Welcome, Greg.
Well, thank you. Thanks for this opportunity.
Great to speak to you. We haven't seen each other for a while. I think the last time was flying back from the SDA conference in Hobart, from memory.
Yes, I remember that very well. The difference in the weather here to there was pretty memorable.
It was late November and we had snow. It was very cold. Indeed. So, Greg, I'm really excited to be able to speak to you today about the amazing work that you guys are doing in terms of actually getting participants SDA funding in their plan, which is no small task.
Thank you. I'm very happy to speak about it. We've been doing this for about 6 years now, and it's been a terrific journey, and we learn quite a lot every day. So it's a contribution we're very happy to be making.
Great, yeah. So just tell us, firstly, who are SDA Services?
It's an organisation that I founded in 2017, and with a view to just being in that narrow lane of assisting NDIS participants to achieve SDA approvals in their NDIS plans. In that time, we've grown around 21 colleagues now, a real range of disciplines, from allied health, occupational therapists, psychologists, a journalist, for example, as well, and maths and economics, actuarial science graduate, also young graduate law students. So a real range of terrific, intelligent and passionate, motivated colleagues.
Fantastic. So you've got a really very diverse team by the sounds of it, which I guess is what it takes to do the job you're doing so well. So what do you actually do? What does SDA Services do?
Our core responsibility when we're engaged for the first time is to assist the participant in making these applications. And that is the production of a report. And the reports deal with a range of things, but they basically have two sources of information. One is from allied health practitioners, and overwhelmingly most often that's occupational therapists. And we work very collaboratively with occupational therapists throughout the country, and their contribution includes particularly dealing with the SDA eligibility criteria, the levels of impairment and support needs, particularly which participants might live with, and also what might be the right appropriate design category for specific needs of this is applying, and some other stuff, support needs, etc. And that's the one source of information. The other source, actually, conversations with participants and people who support them. And those conversations are lengthy and detailed. And what we try and address, first of all, is making sure that participants understand their options under this policy, because the options are quite numerous. And it's only with informed understanding of options that preferences can be expressed. And then once those preferences are expressed, we try and build a story for the NDIA as to what the outcome would look like through a number of different lenses, including, for example, how support is provided in the SDA setting, how community access from there, social and economic engagement, for example. And also, once that story is being somewhat crystallized, there's also good work on it's going to cost the NDA good. So some forensically money, all of those features of work coming to a report, which takes maybe 8 to 10 weeks there, about 80 pages to 100 page document on that period.
Wow.
And so that's our core responsibility when they first.
Yeah. So, okay, that's your core business. That's, obviously very, very involved. And I'd like to hear more about the other sides, but we won't go there just yet. I'd love for you to tell our listeners a bit about your background, your story, Greg, how you got into this.
Yes. Well, my primary, credential is that our youngest daughter, Celine, is 30 years old now, and Celine was born with a very rare chromosomal abnormality, one of 15 people in the world, as best we know. And Celine's been quite severely disabled from birth, intellectually and physically. So my wife and I have been her primary carers for 30 years, and we continue in that role. So therein lies an inspiration, I guess. And my background before Celine's birth was legal practice, and then after she arrived, I worked from home a fair bit necessarily, and started to do some property projects, and ended up doing a fair bit of public housing and housing for people with disabilities. So this sector was a natural sort of segue with that background.
Yes, certainly. Sounds like it. Yeah, well, obviously, I guess Celine, does she qualify for SDA? Is she in an SDA home?
She lives with us still. She definitely will be SDA eligible, and that life stage hasn't arrived yet. And she's delightful to live with. We'd miss her terribly if she wasn't with us, and we're coping really well with providing the supports that we do, along with the fantastic support that NDIS assists us with. So at the moment, that's all cool, but I think that's definitely for our future would be an SDA outcome.
Yeah. Wonderful. Can you explain the SDA application process to us?
Sure. I spoke about that report that take responsibility for. I guess it addresses the things that I mentioned, eligibility and participants' preferences. And the way the SDA rules work is that if a participant is eligible, and some criteria around that, then the decision maker, the NDIA, must then go on to decide what is an appropriate building type, design category and location. So a lot of the process, assuming eligibility, then addresses that building type, design category and location issue. I mentioned the report. When everybody's happy with what it says, when the participant particularly is happy with what it says, it goes into the NDIA via a home and living application, and there's a home and living team within the NDIA that takes responsibility for considering these matters really closely. So that's the process. So I mentioned it takes us, more than 2 months to do our first job in producing that report. We're seeing outcomes from the NDIA side in terms of decision making of the order of 2 to 3 months as a sort of average, I guess.
Have you seen that time frame come down in recent months?
With the change of government, if we're having that conversation before the change of government, I would have said more like 4, 5, 6 months on average. So yes, it's definitely come down in recent times in a really positive way.
That's great. So, and obviously this leads into the conversation around, I guess, the number of applications that are coming back with a positive result for the applicant first up. And how's that? Yeah, how are you seeing that?
I guess because we've been doing this a while, we have been able to amass some pretty sort of compelling statistics, data around this. So we are pleased to see some research done by Summer Foundation quite a few months ago that indicated, I think, that about 83% of applicants for SDA didn't receive the outcome that they were seeking when they first applied. And didn't means either they might have been found ineligible for SDA, or might have not received the building type or design category particularly that they might have been seeking. In our work, it's hard to articulate this in a positive way. We are seeing better outcomes through our doors of the order of, instead of 83% disappointments, we're probably seeing successful outcomes for more than 70%, so about 30.
Oh,
Yeah.
Oh, that says so much. You guys really must put so much work into that report and the background that you need to do to get the correct information in there then.
Thank you. I think it's a really good investment, and obviously I'm not objective and I've got a bias, but I do think it's a good investment to get all of the information relevantly garnered early. I think it's good for the scheme and good for the participant because it is a very significant investment for the scheme once approved. And it's not a support which is likely to be reviewed by the NDIS over time. That doesn't happen very often where SDA supports are reviewed. So in that sense, that early investment in getting it right, I think, is a sensible thing.
Absolutely. So of the ones, so roughly 30% that are not getting the supports that or the level of funding that they've requested up front. And I guess are those all going in for a review?
The next step is an internal review process. It's described as Section 100 review. It's a provision of the NDIS Act. So that's a mandatory next step if there's to be a review. And again, statistics, we're seeing around close to 70% success in those review outcomes. So that's a useful, necessary next step.
Mm-hmm. And then, of course, the next step after that would be to go to the AAT. Is that correct?
That's absolutely correct. And you can't go directly to the AAT. That Section 100 process is a necessary step. And in the AAT, the level of happy outcomes increases quite exponentially. And out of more than 70 applicants, I think, whom we've supported, who've gone into that process and then been supported by advocates and lawyers after that, we found that very close to 100% ended up getting the outcome that they were seeking.
That's really good. That's fantastic to hear. But unfortunately, it should never have had to go to the AAT in the first place. But I guess that's just part of the process with the NDIA as it is at the moment, and it is improving, as you said. So hopefully it will continue to do so. What are your thoughts on that?
I think definitely improving, and I really, because it is such a wonderful scheme and a wonderful support SDA, I'm really reticent about emphasising negatives. The positives include, again, since the change of government, that the number of AAT matters being resolved has increased heaps. So that's been...
And then also, I believe, when I just read the latest report that came out last week, there's a lot less cases going to the AAT in the first place.
Correct. So lots of relatively positive trends to happily share.
Yeah. No, that is really good news. So back to what you've been doing in this space, and how many people have you helped so far through this SDA application process?
I think very soon that number will be 1,200. It's 1,180 something as we speak. So.
Wow, that's fantastic. So, and are those people all over Australia? Because obviously you're based in Brisbane, like we are. Yeah. But you help anyone in Australia?
Definitely, and that's been a really enjoyable part of the undertaking for me. I've been just lots of places, and very recently, say the last 6 months, I've been spending a lot of time in remote and very remote communities in the Northern Territory, for example, and overwhelmingly the participants there are most likely to be First Nations people. So that's just one example of the sort of breadth of where we've been and what we've been doing, and that's been enormously fascinating and enjoyable work as well.
Right. And I did have a scan over your website earlier, and obviously, and you touched on this was part of your team, who they are. You have some really interesting people working in your organisation that assist you in the bigger picture process, again, having that background knowledge of the stats and data. And I thought it was interesting that you look at the cost effectiveness of SDAs, and that's a major part of, I guess, reports that go in?
Yeah, definitely. We saw amongst those decisions which resulted in disappointment, we saw a very reliable element included in those, which was a sentence that says the support does not represent value for money, full stop. So we wondered how to really sort of drill down into whether that was a correct conclusion or not. So approximately getting close to 18 months ago, we privilege of employing Jason Bretz, who's still with us. And Jason, you're embarrassing him by saying he's a maths and economics guru. So Jason started producing financial modelling, which has a 20-year span, which compares SDA and non-SDA and non-preferred SDA to preferred SDA plus other supports. So that add up all of those costs, take into account all of what we think are relevant issues, supports needs, what enterprise the efficiencies of SDA can bring, how informal supports can be better supported SDA, assistive technologies that are available within SDA, and really with my hand off the steering wheel, Jason produced this modelling, and then Tavis, who I mentioned we had an actuary on our team. Tavis was completing his Master's of Actuarial Science, so he joined Jason in that role, and together they produced more than 120 really granular assessments of value for money using that modelling. They had their work peer-reviewed by an Australian university's business school very positively, and really happy to share that in more than 80% of cases, SDA represents better value for money than non-SDA in the assessments so far in very significant numbers. So in broad terms, over 20 years, more than $400,000 is the average benefit of SDA compared to non-SDA.
Wow. Yeah. And that's very compelling in terms of somebody getting the right SDA funding that they need in their plan.
Yeah, it's been a useful bit of work, which we've really enjoyed doing.
Yeah. Fantastic. So that touched on an area that I know when we have potential investors that we speak to, and they're always asking, where are the participants? How do I get the participants? And we walk them through that process of how it can be done, how it works. And we also touch on the complications of tenancy with someone who's got SDA funding, because it's not just about them being funded for a particular house of a particular design. It's all about the supports that they need in that house as well. It's such a complicated process. So, yeah, interesting to hear that you really take all that into account in what you do there.
Yeah, thanks, Debbie. And another thing that we've done aligned with that and have garnered the results of just recently is Jason and Tavis's work has been based on information from reports which predict, occupational therapists particularly, which predicted what the future would look like. And we thought, well, hang on, there's also people who are actually living in SDA and have been for some time. So we commissioned a survey of the lived experience outcomes around Australia of participants. And the entry point was people who'd been in SDA for 6 months or more. And the outcome of that survey was completed recently, and that's full of terrific positives too, both quantitative and qualitative outcomes. So that's sort of added to that body of work to really, I think, show that SDA is a terrific thing for the scheme and to participants.
Absolutely. Question that came to my mind is that now we know SDA participants often have degenerative diseases and they might start off being funded for IEL, but they will have to move up into an FA or a HPS property at some stage in their life. Do you take that into account in their initial reports? Is that part of that process in potentially trying to get them a higher level from the start?
The answer is yes, and there's some provision in the IS Act which justifies that a bit as well, that the agency needs to take a sort of a whole-of-life view to some extent. That's difficult for the decision makers, I acknowledge. We have heard from the NDIA from the start that participants' future needs are considered when SDA decisions are made. I asked at a social function one time a specific question, what does that mean? How far in the future do you consider? And the answer back then, and this is probably 4 years ago, was 2 years into the future. So we try and concentrate on what participants might know about what the next 2 years looks like for them. Oftentimes they don't know because so many conditions are hard to predict in terms of trajectory. And I guess another observation is that if a participant is, say, fully accessible as the appropriate design category, there's a reasonable to high likelihood that they will need high physical support at some time in the future as their upper body starts to fatigue. And my personal sort of bias is that that's a good thing for SDA providers to consider by putting in place the infrastructures for high physical support when they build.
Mm-hmm. That's right, yeah. And I guess we're seeing that in the SDA builds around Australia is the majority at the moment are high physical support that is constructed. I think Australia-wide, when I was looking at the latest data, is something like 67% of new builds.
Right. And I guess I'm not across that data, Debbie, but I guess that was partly a function of the sector looking at the top right-hand side of the pricing matrix. And
absolutely, very much so, yes. However, it's, we look at it that, an investor needs to consider that they're not necessarily going to get that income because there just aren't that many participants out there. However, it does provide more properties that will be fit for purpose long-term for participants who will degenerate and need to move up. So if a lot of the investor is willing, I guess, to settle for a lower income initially, the chances are that it will increase even with the same participants in residence, potentially,
I agree. I think it supports the, if I can say it this way, landlord-tenant relationship well. Means that if the participant is happy where they are, the likelihood of them needing to move in the future is reduced. The vacancy risk for the landlord is reduced, so I think it's a win-win.
Yes, precisely. Yeah, that's totally how we see it too. So, but it does come down to the bottom line in a lot of investors' minds, unfortunately. But these factors do need to be taken into account for sure. So that really leads into the next thing I wanted to discuss with you, which was about the different SDA designs and how they're tailored to particular disabilities. So I guess just to run through the different cases that you work with, their disabilities, and why particular categories and features within a home are suited for them, and that's why you would apply for a particular category in their application.
Sure. So the SDA design categories, there's 4. You're well aware: high physical support, fully accessible, improved livability, and robust. So high physical support and fully accessible respond to the needs of participants who live with severe mobility impairments. And the key differentiator in, I guess, the decision makers' minds, and also correctly in my view, is whether participants require mechanical hoisting for transfers from bed to shower chair to wheelchair, etc. So if that's the case, then high physical support is likely to be an appropriate result. It's not as simple as that in my view. Sometimes participants may have a very high level of physical support needs and not require hoisting for transfers and still be in that high physical support category, might be relevant to their specific needs.
And this is why I guess in the design standards, the provision for hoists is required, not the hoists.
Correct. So that's true. That's true, I'm sure. So that's typically high physical support. Fully accessible more typically is people who live who mobilise in wheelchairs most likely, or mobilise in wheelchairs mostly, and according to fatigue or terrain need to do that, and that they might use their upper body to move from one device to another, to a bed, etc. So that's quite typical cohort for fully accessible.
And they would be, and probably even more than high physical support, they would be needing things like adjustable bench tops or kitchen cupboards that can be moved down, things in their wardrobes in their bedrooms where they can actually access higher railings that can be movable as well. So that's all very much, I guess, a part of if they've got the ability to do that, but they don't need those extra provisions in high physical support, that's what needs to be fully accessible for them.
I completely agree. And then oftentimes assistive technologies which are funded elsewhere in the participants' plan and a separate sort of parallel process. But yes, what those technologies bring with them is a level of independence, which most times means a better level of well-being, and also less cost to the scheme.
Least support costs, absolutely. Yeah.
Well, not having to ask somebody to do something, the wonderful ability to do it yourself.
Yeah. Yeah. So basically wheelchair users in most cases for both of those levels.
Yes.
Disabilities in general would cause someone to be in a wheelchair and need this funding, need these kind of funds?
Well, maybe lots of people who have had spinal injuries that occur, in sporting or in road accidents, for example. And oftentimes those injuries have occurred at a time in their lives when they've lived otherwise independently up until then. We certainly see conditions that people have been living with from birth and have never been able to mobilise. And we also see progressive neurological conditions as well. So,
what are some examples of those?
For example, motor neurone disease or multiple sclerosis, for example, support a lot of participants who are living with those progressive conditions. Yeah, so it's a range of examples. I'd struggle to give you a comprehensive.
No, this is a good sort of understanding for our listeners of what sort of people would, you think, okay, it would just be a spinal injury, would need to be in a wheelchair, but it goes much far beyond.
Yes, certainly.
Yeah, and what about improved livability?
I think improved livability, I've got two sort of views on it, which are experience-based. I mentioned earlier that if a participant is eligible, then the decision-making process must allocate a design category to them. And it's my view that improved livability, if robust and fully accessible and high physical support aren't applicable, then improved livability is the only choice. Is one perspective. Another absolutely appropriate perspective as well is the design standard elements for improved livability, which include things like better wayfinding. So participants who might with visual impairments includes also less better access than mainstream housing, so significantly reduced tripping and falls risks, and also responses to participant sensory needs and responses. So that it's both that sort of, that's where you go if you're not suitable to another, but it's also those specific inclusions are very relevant to consider for participants. And quite typically, these are people who mobilise okay and who may, for example, also live with some tripping falls risks as well. And certainly people with psychosocial impairments who don't require a robust outcome and who are otherwise SDA eligible, that's improved ability tends to be the appropriate outcome for them.
Mm-hmm. And I guess some of the other potential funded participants in that category, people with Down syndrome, autism, result of autism spectrum.
Absolutely. And we've seen lots of examples of that. And for the people with autism, the differentiator there can tend to be the level of the problematic behaviours when they occur, and including levels of property damage and noise, and the extent to which they might be affected by noise can be relevant to the robust or
absolutely
used to the robust.
So I guess, we know that improved livability and robust there is a connection there. Somebody with improved livability funding can live in a house that's designed for robust, whereas someone with robust can't live in an improved livability home or the other categories. Of course, it's very much a standalone in that sense. But there is more of a crossover with the participants, you're saying, of those two categories.
Yes, definitely. And we'll also see in the reviews and appeals work that sometimes there's an aspiration for robust and the outcome is improved livability. So that's an issue that sometimes needs to be resolved in the reviews process.
Yeah. So, but there are, as you just said, there are a number of people that might have psychosocial disabilities that don't need a robust home. And
Absolutely.
that's where they fall into the IL space.
Absolutely. I do think that the key issues for robust are property damage history, and that's a focus, not just on the cost of repairs, but also on safety. For example, the requirement for toughened glass so that people aren't hurting themselves when things are going on. And also, I do think the one that I like to concentrate on a bit as well is noise, the acoustic features of robust builds, and how noise from outside can be really triggering for some of these people, and noise from inside can be pretty tough on the neighbourhood. So, that's...
Yeah. So it's not just about the behaviours that might be self-harm or damaging to property, but it's also about external forces that can be triggers that robust home can protect them against.
Absolutely. Yeah. So they're things that I think everyone needs to be sensitive to.
Yeah.
And robust also has the option of a breakout space as well. So if things are going really wrong and people need to be safer than being in the same space, then that's where the breakout room can really
absolutely
helpful.
Yeah, for sure. So in terms of okay, you assist the participants to get their funding in their plan, but you are also an SDA provider. So you do obviously manage a number of properties for participants and obviously being connected on both sides of there. Where are you seeing the sort of gaps in housing? Where are you seeing they're just not being built? What's the categories that are just not available?
It's a really good question. We don't get a very good lens on that from our housing provider service because we've got a very niche approach to that where we love it when participants, and it's a rare outcome, but where participants can be their own investor or their families can be their own investor in SDA. We think it's, as I said, it's a rare outcome because it requires significant resources. But when it can happen, then I think it's terrific. And oftentimes people, including participants, say, Greg, I don't want to do all that stuff. So that's the only housing provider service we provide is for that circumstance. So it doesn't give me a very good lens on where what's missing is. But I guess anecdotally, I think that the where there's the biggest difference between demand and supply is robust,
which we hear all over.
Mm.
Yeah, for sure.
So I think a lot of providers have their fingers crossed about how the pricing review is going to respond to that market reality.
All waiting to find out what that's going to look like.
Mm.
So it's getting closer. We don't know when that's going to be released yet, but hopefully it will make a big difference in that area. So yeah, absolutely. Well, Greg, I think that covers all of the questions that I had. Did you want to add anything to what we've discussed or anything that I didn't touch on that you wanted to let our listeners know?
No, I appreciate the opportunity to have this chat. Thank you, Debbie. I think I guess the only thing I'd like to add is we're having it at a good time. I think that the sector is going in a really good direction and it's been such a complicated space for its first 6 years. And I think there's a lot of, crystallising of knowledge and issues now, and the market's evolving in a really good way, and that's resulting in lots of fantastic outcomes for participants.
Yeah, I agree. That's wonderful. I think we are at a turning point with SDA and the NDIS, and it is getting better, and there is so many more positives coming out of it now. For
Absolutely.
Sure. Yeah.
We agree with each other.
Yeah. Well, Greg, it's been an absolute pleasure to have this chat today. Thank you so much for giving us a little peek into your world and what you do. And I think you guys are doing an amazing job.
Well, it's my pleasure. Thanks for the invitation. I appreciate it.
Yeah. So now if somebody wants to get in contact with SDA Services to see how you might be able to help with someone look at getting SDA funding, how do they contact you?
I think definitely our website is one good way. We've got a contact facility there. And what we've also got on the website is an eligibility tool, which we worked on as another project for quite a while with a great organisation, Fair Living. And participants who might be interested in their eligibility can access that tool, and 20 minutes later they will receive a report which gives them a bit of an indication of whether they're likely to be eligible or not. And we've got contact details on the website as well.
Brilliant. Okay, and we'll put a link to that in the description of this episode. So if you do want to get in touch with SDA Services to firstly find out if you're eligible or someone you know might be eligible and take it from there, then that's a great place to start. So, Greg, thank you so much for your time today. It's been wonderful chatting to you. And, I'd do this again sometime and take it further, take the conversation further.
Thank you again. I've enjoyed it. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, bye.
We hope you enjoyed this episode. Please make sure you are subscribed and following us so you can keep in the loop with all of our upcoming episodes. We would really appreciate it if you could leave us a 5-star rating, a written review, and to share this podcast with those that could benefit. Until next time, catch you on the next episode.